Hey, all right. In this video, what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the basic parts of language or of writing. This semester, when we talk about writing, we're going to focus on the basic parts of writing. We're not going to focus on really advanced writing techniques because that's not very useful for you. So we just want to find some practical things to focus on to help us understand writing at its most basic level. So that's what this video is going to talk about. Let me bring up my PPT. As you can see here, it's called the basic parts of language or of writing. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So like I just mentioned, in this class, we will focus on building a solid foundation of the fundamentals of writing. That means focus on the really basic features of writing, not the extremely advanced features of writing that are not very practical for you, because I don't think you need to write something extremely advanced. We just want to understand the basic ways to write an essay, for example. So that's what we're going to focus on. Now, let me just point out that in this video, I'm going to refer to two Microsoft Word documents. The first Microsoft Word document is this one right here called Clauses and Phrases. So this is the first one that I'm going to cover, and then we're going to move on to a second file. So just know that the information that's in the slide is also contained in this handout. And actually in this handout is an activity that you will also do. So let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation and let's begin. So let's start focusing on the fundamentals, the basic building blocks of writing, of language. So let's focus on the difference between a sentence, a clause, and a phrase. What is a sentence? A sentence is a group of words with a subject and a verb, and it communicates a complete thought, a complete idea. We use sentences thousands and thousands of times every day. Okay, what is a clause? A clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. So a subject is a person or thing that does something, and a verb is the action that the subject takes. Now, a phrase, on the other hand, is a group of words without a subject and a verb. So a sentence and a clause, they both have a subject and a verb. A phrase does not have a subject and a verb. All right. So I just want to point out in the clauses versus phrase handout, you can see this chart. We're going to talk about this chart very soon. So here is a sentence that's missing the verb. In the sentence, is the blue part in the morning a clause or a phrase? In the morning. Does in the morning have a subject and a verb? In the morning. Preposition, article, noun, time. There actually is no subject or verb combination. So that is a phrase because there's no subject and verb in the blue part. How about the yellow part? Is this a clause or a phrase? before I go to school. Well, it does have a subject. What is the subject? I. What is the verb? Go. So before I go to school. Subject is I, verb is go. So that's the difference between a clause and a phrase. Clause has a subject and a verb. A phrase doesn't have a subject and a verb combination. So, once again, a sentence is just a group of words with a subject and a verb, and it communicates a complete thought. So, here's an example. In the morning, I do yoga before I go to school. That is a complete thought. If I tell you that sentence, in the morning, I do yoga before I go to school, you will clearly understand what I mean because that is a complete thought. That's a sentence. Okay, now how about a clause? A clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. And there are two types of clauses. Independent clause and dependent clause. What is the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause? Well, think about it. Let's say a college student who is living by him or herself has a part-time job, is earning money to pay for tuition, to pay for food, to pay for their books, to pay for their apartment. They don't need their parents to give them money. They are independent. So an independent clause is a complete thought. It is on its own. It is free. A dependent means it depends. It relies on something. So an independent clause, it expresses a complete thought. It can be a sentence. On the other hand, a dependent clause does not express a complete thought. It is not a complete thought. And a dependent clause begins with words such as when, while, if, that, who. These are called subordinating conjunctions. We'll talk about that later. And dependent clauses are not complete sentences. They cannot exist on their own. An independent clause can exist on its own. A dependent clause cannot exist on its own. So let's look at some examples. Here are independent clauses. These are complete thoughts and they exist as an individual sentence. I used to work at Yuxa. Subject, verb, complete thought. Seoul is the capital of Korea. Complete thought, subject and verb. These are complete thoughts, complete sentences. How about dependent clauses? These are incomplete thoughts. While I was working at Yuxa, so it has a subject, I, and it has a verb, was, but it's not a complete thought. If I told you, hey, while I was working at Yuxa, you would ask me, what? Complete your thought. I don't know what happened while you were working at Yuxa. So while I was working at Yuxa is a dependent clause. It is not a complete thought. If it rains tomorrow, this has a subject, it has a verb, rains, but it is not a complete thought. It's not a sentence, a complete sentence. If I told you, if it rains tomorrow, you would be confused. You would ask me, Robin, what happens? What will happen if it rains tomorrow? Complete your thought. So independent clauses, complete thoughts. Dependent clauses, incomplete thoughts. But both independent clauses and dependent clauses, they both have a subject and a verb. So what is a sentence? A sentence has an independent clause. I went to school last Saturday. Here's an independent clause. I, subject, went, verb, complete thought. So a sentence is basically an independent clause. What is the verb? What is the subject? I is the subject, went is the verb. Okay. So in activity 1, in this handout, let me show you again. So this is the handout. As you can see here, here's a chart. So independent clause, it contains a subject and a verb because it's a clause, and it is a complete thought. A dependent clause has a subject and a verb, but it is not a complete thought. A phrase does not have a subject and a verb, nor is it a complete thought. Okay. Activity 1, and here's a nice chart. Here's activity 1. So this is the activity that I'm referring to in this slide. So for this activity, you're just identifying whether the clause is independent or dependent and identifying the subjects and the verbs. So in activity 1, all of the expressions are clauses. They all have subjects and verbs. Some are independent clauses, some are dependent clauses. So here are 2 examples. The trees are pretty in autumn. Okay, this is a clause. It has a subject and a verb. Is that a complete thought? Yes, it is. If I tell you the trees are pretty in autumn, you'll say, oh yeah, they are very pretty. Nice and brown. I love those. So that is an independent clause. So write an I and underline the subject and italicize the verbs. In the second example, if you go to the store today, that is not a complete thought because you don't know what will happen or what will happen if you go to the store today. If I tell you, if you go to the store today, you'll say, Robin, finish your thought. So that is a dependent clause. And what is the subject? You, and the verb is go. And as you can see here, the dependent clause begins with if. Let me go back to this handout. Let's go back to the top. So dependent clauses contain a subject and a verb, but do not express a complete thought. A dependent clause begins with a subordinate conjunction, such as although, after, as, while, when, until, because. There's so many subordinate conjunctions. So if is very simple. If the sentence or if the clause begins with a subordinate conjunction, such as if, it's dependent. So if you look at these right away, oh, that does not begin with a subordinating conjunction. It's an independent clause. Oh, that begins with the subordinating conjunction. It's a dependent clause. So that's a tip. So for homework, do this activity. Just write I or D in this blank, whether the clause is independent or dependent. Underline the subjects and then italicize the verbs. All right, let us move on. So do that activity for homework. Now let's move on to types of sentences. So we just talked about phrases and clauses. Now let's talk about the three main types of sentences. And for the remaining part of this video, I will be referring to this handout. It is called Simple, Compound, and Complex Sentences. So I'll upload this and you can also take a look at this. And the first page is reference, and then the remaining few pages are activities. So let's continue. So let's take a look at the three main types of sentences. What are they? First one is simple. Okay, there are simple sentences. Compound sentences. Compound means when two things combine. Two things are combined. That's what it means to compound, a compound. Then complex. So simple is kind of basic. Complex is like more advanced. So simple, compound, and complex. Let's take a look at simple sentences. What is a simple sentence? Well, a simple sentence just has one independent clause. We just talked about what an independent clause is. An independent clause has a subject and a verb, and it's a complete thought. Basically, a simple sentence is one independent clause. Check it out. Super simple. I watched a movie. Subject, I, verb, watched. What did I watch? A movie. That is a complete thought. If I told you I watched a movie, you're like, oh, cool. What movie did you watch? You know what I mean. It's a complete thought. I enjoy drinking a glass of wine and eating steak. That has a subject and a verb, complete thought. My wife and I went out for dinner and saw a movie last night. Once again, third sentence has a subject and a verb, and it's a complete thought. These three sentences are simple sentences. Each of them has one independent clause, one complete thought. So as you can see, subject, I watched, verb, what did I watch? A movie. That's the object of the verb. That is a complete thought. How about in the second one? What is the subject? I. What is the verb? Enjoy. What do I enjoy? Drinking a glass of wine and eating steak. Third one. What is the subject? Who? My wife and I. My wife and I. And the verb went out. All right, so simple sentences are actually simple. Just one independent clause. Just one complete thought. That's all. So if we go back to this handout, as you can see, simple sentences have one independent clause. Here's a homework assignment. Very, very simple. Write 3 sentences about yourself, your family, etc. So for example, I have an older brother. I have an older brother. That's a simple sentence. One complete thought. Okay. Now let's move on to the second type of sentence. Compound. So like I said, a compound. What compound means is to combine two things. A, B, compound, together, combining them. All right. So what is a compound sentence? Well, compound sentence has 2 or more independent clauses joined together. What is an independent clause? It's a complete thought. It has a subject and a verb, and it's a complete thought. So a compound sentence combines at least 2 complete thoughts. And it uses conjunctions that join the 2 complete thoughts, the 2 independent clauses, and these are called coordinating conjunctions. There are 7 of these conjunctions. One way to remember these conjunctions is think about fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So fanboys. Just so you know, and, but, and so are the 3 most common. And I'm sure it's the same in Korean, of course. So let's take a look at some examples of compound sentences. I went to the movie. That's an independent clause. I went to the movie. That's a complete thought. My friend stayed home. That's an independent clause. That's a complete thought. I went to the movie. My friend stayed home. We can combine them using but. I went to the movie, but my friend stayed home. So this is a compound sentence. So we're taking 2 independent clauses, combining them using fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So fanboys, it's like the glue. We're combining 2 things, 2 complete thoughts. Here's another example. I didn't know the answer. That's a complete thought. That's an independent clause. I guessed. I guessed. That's a complete thought. That's an independent clause. We can combine them using fanboys. So now we have a compound sentence. So when we combine simple sentences to make compound sentences, it makes the writing more advanced, like higher level writing. It sounds good. Having only simple sentences doesn't sound good. Sometimes it's good to have simple sentences, but we want to use a variety of simple, compound, complex sentences to make the writing sound better. So take a look here. What are the 2 independent clauses in the top sentence? 2 independent clauses, the 2 complete thoughts. I went to the movie and my friend stayed home. Down here, I didn't know the answer. I guessed. So every underlined part is an independent clause. What is an independent clause? It is a complete thought that has a subject and a verb. So what are the subjects? So take a look. What is the subject in this underlined part? Hi. What is the subject in this underlined part? My friend. Down here, I. Okay. What are the verbs? In this independent clause, went. In this independent clause, stayed. In this independent clause, didn't know. And in this one, guessed. All right. Pretty simple. So a simple sentence is just a complete thought, just an independent clause. A compound sentence, at least 2 simple sentences combined using fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboys. These are called coordinating conjunctions. These are the glue, the things that combine the 2 independent clauses together to create a compound sentence. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. There are only 7. Only 7. All right. So in these 2 sentences, what are the coordinating conjunctions? What's the glue? In the top sentence, but. In the bottom sentence, so. Okay. All right, for activity 2, and let me just, once again, go back to this handout. In activity 2, there are 5 compound sentences. This is super simple. All you need to do is underline the 2 independent clauses in each compound sentence and italicize the word, the coordinating conjunction, the fanboys that joins them. So let's take a look at an example. You could get a job at a convenience store. That is a simple sentence. That is an independent clause. You is the subject, get is the verb. You could get a job at a cafe. That's an independent clause. You is the subject, get a job is the verb. So we're combining those two independent clauses using or. That's activity 2. Very simple. Underline and italicize. Underline the independent clauses, italicize the fanboys. All right. And activity 3. Oh, I'm sorry. That is activity 2. Okay. Activity 3, combining independent clauses to make compound sentences. So for activity 3, which is down here, there are 5 pairs of independent clauses. You want to combine them using fanboys. You want to make compound sentences. So let's take a look here. Here's an example. These are 2 independent clauses. I don't have enough cash. I is the subject, have is the verb. The second independent clause, I bought the bicycle with my credit card. I is the subject, bought is the verb. So we want to combine these using fanboys. So what is the correct fanboys to use here? I did not have enough cash. I bought the bicycle with my credit card. In this sentence, it sounds like here's the cause, here's the effect. Cause and effect. So fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Which word expresses cause and effect? So, oops. Oops, hold on 1 second here. Okay, yeah, let me just, sorry about this. Actually, I rearranged some slides to make this presentation. And okay, sorry about that. Let me go back. Okay. So, like we were just talking about, for number 1, I did not have enough cash. That's like the cause. The effect is I bought the bicycle with my credit card. So what fanboys can we use to combine them? So I did not have enough cash, so I bought the bicycle with my credit card. All right, so for activity 3, let me go back to here. You want to combine these 5 pairs of independent clause with fanboys to make compound sentences. So here's an example. The street food in China looked disgusting. It surprisingly tasted good. So independent clause, we can combine them to make a compound sentence. The street food in China, looked disgusting. It surprisingly tasted good. What fanboys? Yet or but. The street food in China looked disgusting, but it surprisingly tasted good. Yet it surprisingly tasted good. What is the difference? So for this activity, you want to combine each pair of independent clauses to make compound sentences. Now, very quickly, let's talk about the difference between but and yet. So fanboys, for and nor but, or yet so. What is the difference between but and yet? Let me briefly go over the difference. But is like hajiman. You're just combining ideas that are opposite or different. Yet is like kurandedo. Okay, yet is kurandedo. So kurandedo and hajiman both combine ideas that are surprisingly different. So as you can see, hajiman or but, you can use in general, any situation. You can combine ideas that are opposite different, even though it's not shocking. Or you can combine ideas that are surprisingly different or shockingly different using but. But yet, you can only use if the ideas are surprisingly different. So I'm sure you feel the difference between kurandedo and hajiman. I'm sure you feel the difference. That's the difference between yet and but. So here we go. 나는 차로 좋아해요. 내 친구가 커피를 좋아해요. So these are two independent clauses, contrasting different things, different likes. Here, okay, here's a contrast, different things, but this sounds kind of surprising. So these are two, these are Korean sentences. So in this case, you could say 하지만. You can use but. In this case, you can say either. So this is a surprising difference. This is not a very surprising difference. I like tea, my friend likes coffee. Not a big deal. Now you cannot use kurandedo here. That would sound unusual. Similarly, you shouldn't use yet here. So what are these in English? I like tea, but my friend likes coffee. Down here, the weather was wet and cold, yet we had a great time. But we had a great time. So in the second sentence, the difference is surprising. The weather was wet and cold, yet we had a great time. So it's a surprising difference. I like tea, but my friend likes coffee. That's not shocking or surprising. That's normal. People like different beverages. So this, I believe, sounds very unusual, doesn't it? This is okay, because this sounds unusual because this is not surprising or shocking, the difference. Similarly, in that situation, you cannot say yet. You need to say but. Okay, hold on one second, because my PowerPoint sometimes gets extremely slow. So hold on one second. Slide 66. Oh, okay. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Yeah, let me get back here. Okay, so activity 3. Oh, once again, activity 3, just combine these sentences. I'm sorry, combine these pairs of independent clauses to make compound sentences. And you want to use fanboys. For some of the sentences, maybe more than one fanboys works. That's okay, just do your best. Try to choose the correct one. We will go over this in class. Okay, activity 4, writing compound sentences. So for activity 4, write 3 compound sentences about yourself, your family, etc. For example, my mom worked at a bookstore and my dad worked for the government. That's in 2 independent clauses, make a compound sentence. All right, let us move on. we are moving along, and I think we are getting close to finishing. Okay, we have talked about simple sentences. We've talked about compound sentences. What's the difference between the two? Hold on a second. The PPT, my blanket's so slow. So I'm going to close it and open it. Hopefully this works. Okay, let's review very quickly the difference between simple and compound sentences. Okay, or let's take a look at differences. Okay, better, cool. Whew. So simple sentences, one independent clause. I took a bus to school the other day. I enjoy hanging out with friends. So these are simple sentences, just an independent clause. Compound sentences combine two or more independent clauses using fanboys. I like to relax on vacation, and I like to try different types of food. The iPhone 16 won't be cheap, nor will it be easy to get right away. So we're combining two independent clauses to make a compound sentence. Okay. Now, what is a complex sentence? So simple means basic, complex means advanced. So how or why are complex sentences advanced? Let's take a look. So do you remember we talked about different types of clauses? We said independent clauses and dependent clauses. Independent clause is a complete thought. Dependent clause is an incomplete thought. Both independent clauses and dependent clauses, they have a subject and a verb, but an independent clause is a complete thought. A dependent clause is an incomplete thought. Well, that's what a complex sentence is. A complex sentence has one independent clause, a complete thought, and one, at least one, dependent clause, a complete thought. And for compound sentences, we use fanboys to combine them. With complex sentences, we use different types of conjunctions called subordinating conjunctions. There are so many, too many to list. But some examples are while, when, who, where. And there are three kinds of dependent clauses: adverb, adjective, and noun clauses. So here's an example. When I found out my Suning score, I was happy. Here's another one. I brushed my teeth as soon as I woke up. So do you remember in activity 1 of the clauses? Oh, hold on a second. So do you remember in this activity, activity 1, where you identified independent clauses and dependent clauses? Well, that's kind of what we're doing here. When you make a complex sentence, when you make a complex sentence, you're combining an independent clause with a dependent clause. So in the top sentence, when I found out my Suning score, I was happy. Those are two clauses. When I found out my Suning score, I was happy. Which one is an independent clause? Which one is a complete thought? If I told you, hey, when I found out my Suning score, you would say, Robin, complete your sentence, complete your thought. But if I told you I was happy, that's a complete thought. So in the top one, I was happy is the complete thought. How about in the bottom one? I brushed my teeth. That's one clause. As soon as I woke up, that's the second clause. What's the complete thought? I brushed my teeth. So those are independent clauses. And remember, dependent clauses begin with a subordinating conjunction. When, as soon as. So what are the dependent clauses? When I found out my Suning score and as soon as I woke up. So these words are subordinating conjunctions. A subordinating conjunction always begins dependent clauses. So there are three types of clauses. Adverb clauses. Adverb clauses, they answer questions such as how, why, where, and when. This is a complex sentence. I didn't finish my homework because my friend visited me. What is the independent clause? I didn't finish my homework. What is the dependent clause? Because my friend visited me. Every dependent clause begins with a subordinating conjunction. So this dependent clause answers a question. What question does it answer? I didn't finish my homework because my friend visited me. What does because my friend visited me answer? Why? Why didn't you finish your homework? Why didn't I finish my homework? Why? Because my friend visited me. So these are adverb clauses. Another type of clause is an adjective clause. Adjectives describe nouns. Here is a complex sentence. I know the man. That's the independent clause. Who lives next door is the independent clause. It begins with a subordinating conjunction. Okay? So who describes noun? Who is this describing? It's describing the man. I know the man. What man? The man who lives next door. Finally, we have noun clauses. Noun clauses, they're nouns. They can be a subject or an object. I couldn't hear what he said. I'm sorry, what she said. This is a complex sentence. Independent clause plus a dependent clause combined. Every dependent clause begins with a subordinating conjunction. In this sentence, what is the subordinating conjunction? So this is the dependent clause. I couldn't hear is the independent clause. I couldn't hear. I couldn't hear. That's a complete thought. What she said, that is a dependent clause. Now, what she said, is that the subject of the sentence or the object? It is the object. It is the object of hear. Hear is a verb. This is the object. I couldn't hear. What couldn't you hear? I couldn't hear what she said. All right, so for activity 5, you want to identify the parts of complex sentences. So just remember, complex sentences are combinations of an independent clause with one or more dependent clauses. And every dependent clause begins with a subordinating conjunction. When, where, while, as soon as, because, if. So, activity 5, you want to identify parts of a complex sentence. So while I was studying, is that an independent clause or a dependent clause? While I was studying, of course, it's a dependent clause. My roommate was playing computer games. Independent clause. That's a complete thought. So italicize dependent clauses, underline independent clauses. So as you can see, very simple. Italicize dependent clauses, underline independent clauses. For activity 6, write a complex sentence using each of the words. So you can write about anything, but just remember a complex sentence has an independent clause, complete thought, plus a dependent clause, an incomplete thought that begins with these words. Almost done. Oh, hold on. Okay, activity 6, creating complex sentences. And finally, we're at the end. Okay, activity 7. Last one. Here are 9 sentences. In the blank, you want to write S if it's a simple sentence, CP if it's a compound sentence, CX if it's a complex sentence. So a simple sentence is an independent clause, one independent clause, one complete thought. A compound sentence is 2 independent clauses combined using fanboys. A complex sentence is an independent clause combined with a dependent clause using a subordinating conjunction. So do activity 7 also. Okay, now let's do a little review. So here are 5 questions. Let's review. What's the difference between a phrase and a clause? A phrase doesn't have a subject and a verb. A clause does have a subject and a verb. What are the 2 types of clauses? Dependent clauses and independent clauses. What's the difference between a dependent clause and an independent clause? Which one is a complete thought? A dependent clause isn't a complete thought, but an independent clause is a complete thought. What begins a dependent clause? What's at the beginning of a dependent clause? A subordinating conjunction. When, while, if, because, as soon as, so many. What is a simple sentence? It's just one independent clause. It's a complete thought. 4 more questions. A compound sentence is a combination of 2 things. What are the 2 things? Independent clause plus independent clause. How do we combine those 2 independent clauses? Fanboys. For and nor, but, or, yet. So what is the difference between but and yet? Which one is used for only surprising differences? Yet. But you can use generally for anything, any contrast or difference. Last question. A complex sentence is a combination of 2 things. What are the 2 things? An independent clause and 1 or more dependent clause. All right. Well, I hope you found this video informative. Like I said, this is like the very basics of writing, of language. And so please, after watching this video, if you have any questions, ask me in class, Kako Talk Me. We will discuss this in class. We will review it. But please, I hope you found it informative, and I will see you in class next time. Peace.